Namaste. This is the workshop for dealing primarily with Self 3. Now it's interesting because the exploration and sharing of Self 3, I invite you to draw on your highest level of awareness and consciousness to really participate in your own thinking and introspection as I share certain ideas with you. To review for a moment, Self 1 had to do with nurturing, and that means nurturing practically, biologically, in terms of what a baby needs from the moment it is conceived while it's in the womb, which we call Part A of Self 1, to Part B of Self 1, which is related to the moment it first takes its breath on Earth. And the nurturing has to do with what the baby needs for the body, the mind, and the soul. It's interesting that the same nurturing, although not concretely and practically, like the biology, is necessary for the individual to continue growing and blossoming to its fruition. We also shared Self 2, which is related to what's needed in terms of the outside support and space to continue maturation and our growth until we flower. So all of the things that we value so much in life ought to be found in Self 2 and rooted in the power chakra, which is at the basis of just about everything we do in Self 2. It also is the root of the family, it's the root of the community, it's the root of anything that has a group, the tribe, the civilization, the nation, whatever. Now we come to Self 3, which is still open to discovery as to the exact manifestations of that. But for our purposes, we are going to call it creation and resurrection. Now it's interesting, whatever comes to your mind for either one of those things will demonstrate the essence of Self 3. At the beginning of Self 3, which would be found in the love chakra 4, moves through the 5th chakra of self-expression, on through the 6th chakra of the mind, knowledge, information, and concentration, as well as consciousness and self-observation, to the door of the 7th chakra, which is related to the translation of the message of Buddha and Jesus and the Dalai Lama, all rolled into one. Okay, so as we move through the love chakra, through the romance, and through the requirements of the civilization for marriage, and the civil laws. As we move through that, we will see that we come to the door that opens into the unknown and the invisible. And it's here that we find that the enlightened masters have come to share their insights so that we could use them to move toward heaven on earth and heaven beyond earth. Now, as we move on up, expanding the spiral to its disappearance at the seventh chakra, we will go through the integration of all the other chakras into the blossoming of our talents and abilities and our maturation in terms of sharing our lives, our energy, our space that we've created by our lives and left behind after we have transitioned from this space to the next unknown space. And as we move on through that, we will see that the various enlightened masters have all come to share their vibration and their understanding and their talents and their enlightenments relating to this space. Yogananda Pashanama has one approach. Osho has one approach. Amar has another approach. And there are many of the masters that have different approaches, but they all have certain things in common. And these things are rooted in their character and their personality. At every level that we can think of and that we can see in the chakras, there is an integration of the principle of 1 plus 1 equals 3. 1 plus 2 equals 3. Everything keeps moving and synthesizing into the unitarity, spiritual oneness that we see that's present in all of the Guru's teachings, in all the Guru's exemplified living of their teaching, and all of their sharing with those who follow them. So if we take personalities, for example, and I invite you to research the models that you look to for higher level civilization, whether it's Buddha or Christ, Muhammad, or any of the modern day masters. And I want you to study those in depth. Study their early lives. Study when they became enlightened and their path to enlightenment. And use those as kind of a yardstick to look at your own life, because you travel the same highway, and there may be sparks that will ignite your enlightenment toward greater expansion, greater joy, and the presence of heaven on earth. So, as we move from the concrete to the more abstract, as we did at the beginning when we showed the mud painting, and I showed the cover of my first book, Creative Self-Discovery, a painting by Vasarely of a yantra, which includes a spiral with multicolors. all of those are a part of the oneness, going back to the first session where we drew a comparison of the flower and the seed and the stem and the growth into the flowering of the beauty and the fragrance. That is the same metaphor that we want to use for the development of the human being. Now it's interesting as we use the abstract symbol of the spiral expanding from the beginning of the sperm and the egg contacting and starting to create the zygote up through the ending of the biological phase of our life, we will see that we return relatively to the same space, but in a more expanded boundary for the self, until the self merges into the selfless boundary of the universe, which is without end of our knowledge, but rooted in dark matter, dark energy, and black holes that keep creating in space and with space. It's interesting to note that at this level, we're on the verge of discovering many properties in space that we have not known before, that will bring together the so-called sub-laws of the universe and help us see more clearly how these sub-laws fit into the creation of the one law that all the masters and all the top spiritual leaders agree on. So, as we move on toward our maturation, everybody has an opportunity to participate in that oneness, to share and become one with the God consciousness, one with each other. But in order to do that, we have to transition from the biological through the psychosocial, through the verge of space. That means overcoming shame, overcoming, or at least learning to use guilt to enjoy the fruits of our labor in self 2 and in self 3. All of that disappears in the so-called biological death and the transition of the energy from the biological, the scientific, the artistic, to the spatial and the spiritual. And that is open to every individual if they line up and synchronize with their particular unique connection to the universal vibration that expands their energy and comes out in their creative and or inventive expressions. And if we note, the various creative expressions follow the same levels as the chakras, so that motion, which is vital and essential as one of the early expressions of life in the baby, and the laws of motion all serve as the deep connection that string theory helps to explain between the roots of energy and the fruits of energy at the seventh chakra. Now, as we continue looking at this, our point of view, we will see that self-3 is most exemplified by many of the top masters of various spiritual systems, but particularly with the insight that Christ, Jesus the Christ, brought to our understanding, that of the fact that we indeed transition through to death to the next level of the continuation of our eternal and spacious self, which is presently unknown, but almost every religion points to with certain clues toward perfection. Perfection being what I call the cosmogasm at every level, with every breath, with every heartbeat, showing us heaven in every moment of our life. Now we can achieve this while you live if we can create the inner space of the boundaries of our individual self and follow its growth through timelessness, which can become in an instant or a second, or which can take a lifetime, to the total expansion of the boundaries to include all the universal self. In other words, to see the universe in a grain of sand, as so many poets have put it in their own way. And we're saying the biggest block to that has been our desire to hold on to what we have experienced as pleasurable, the peak of which is demonstrated in the sexual orgasm, and not let that go from our attachments to the psychosocial and biological